start with the traditional way all the Carmelites are going to greet each other. I will say, praise be Jesus Christ, and you all have to say, now and forever. So praise be Jesus Christ.
Now and forever.
Amen. So every time you talk to a Carmelite, they're always going to greet you by saying, praise be Jesus Christ. It's how they'll greet each other when they walk past each other in the monastery hallways. How they'll say hello to each other after they've seen each other for a long haven't seen each other for a long time. It's praise be Jesus Christ. Always it's the first thing they'll say. So very humbled that Father asked me to talk about Carmelite spirituality this morning. I am a big fan. The Carmelite Order traces its origins back to the prophet Elijah. So if you really want a good scriptural basis for Carmelite spirituality, you'll find the first and second book of Kings, where they talk about the prophet Elijah, and then his heir, the prophet Elisha. Their works and their lives are a good model for Carmelite spirituality. So we usually go there to see the origins of this. So prophet Elijah is known as a man whom the Spirit of God led into deep solitude. The name Elijah means Yahweh is my God. And so in a time and a place when the people of Israel were going after false gods and following false prophets, God raised up the prophet Elijah to be someone who was single-hearted for God. And so Elijah's life was all about bringing the people of Israel back into right worship. And the way that God called him to do that, he called down a drought, he slaughtered 400 false prophets, and doing things like that makes a lot of enemies. And so in the course of his life, Elijah had to flee into the desert, and he ended up on Mount Sinai because so many people were trying to kill him. And there in Mount Sinai, God brought him into a deep place of contemplation, even in the midst of all the suffering. And that's where we hear this great story that there was this wind and this fire and this earthquake, but God wasn't in any of those. God was in this still, small voice. And when the still, small voice says, "What are you doing here, Elijah? Why did you flee to Mount Sinai?" Elijah says, "With zeal I have been zealous for the Lord of hosts." And that, to this day, is the motto of the Carmelite Order. So with zeal I have been zealous for the Lord of hosts, to the point where I have suffered, I have gone deeply into the desert where I am alone, because I sought to make my entire life about worshiping you, my God. And so nearly 2,500 years later, the time of the Crusades, one of the first Crusades, there were some men who were fighting in the Crusade who experienced a deep conversion, and they desired to model their lives after the prophet Elijah, after this seeking for God in silence and solitude. And so they moved to Mount Carmel, which was the spot that Elijah had battled against the false prophets and won on Mount Carmel. And so they moved to Mount Carmel, and they desired to live this search for God with everything that they were. So they gave up everything to seek the face of the living God. And they lived these lives of silence and of prayer. And as time went on, more and more men joined them. And so the great patriarch St. Albert of Jerusalem wrote a rule where he codified their way of life. And to this day, you can read this rule of life. And so the Carmelites actually started out as hermits, living in the desert, seeking the face of God. And they named themselves from the beginning the Brothers of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, which was very controversial at the time. Who in their right mind could claim to be a brother of the Mother of God? That was what people were thinking at first. But they saw in Our Lady someone who had brought to perfection this spirit of Elijah, the perfect contemplative. And so while they were living on Mount Carmel, they prayed to Our Lady under the title of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, the one who prayed in the upper room and was there with the apostles when the fire of the Holy Spirit fell. And they saw Our Lady as this model, and a mother, someone Carmelite Order has been all about Elijah and all about Mary. And one of the phrases you'll hear Carmelites say is, I don't remember how it is in Latin, but they'll say, Carmel is all Marys. If you visited any of the Carmelite convents yesterday in Avila, or if there will be a Carmelite convent in Alba de Tormes, there's another Carmelite convent in Fatima. Near the turn, at least in the convents in Avila, there was that phrase, Carmel is all Marys. And so they walk hand in hand with the Mother of God. Later, during those same crusades, eventually the Muslims took over that part of the Holy Land where the Carmelite hermits were living, and so they had to go back to Europe. And when they ended up back in Europe, it seemed like maybe their order was not going to do so well, maybe it wouldn't survive, right? They made this big move. And the prior general of the order, St. Simon Stock, not much is known about him except that he was a holy man. But he had this encounter with Our Lady where she came to him and she held out to him a brown scapular. You might be familiar with the small brown scapular that we can wear every day as just a sign of Our Lady's protection, but the small brown scapular has its origin in these huge brown scapulars that Carmelites wear as part of their habit. And it was actually given by Our Lady to St. Simon Stock, and she said anyone who dies wearing this habit will not suffer the eternal fire. Obviously, that promise of Our Lady is, conditional upon you actually following her words and living a virtuous life. But she gave that scapular to St. Simon Stock, and she made a promise that the Carmelite Order would endure to the end of time. People saw these Carmelite hermits living these holy lives under the protection of Our Lady, and they wanted a piece of that. And so the friars started cutting up little bits of their scapulars and giving them to people to wear. So that is the origin of the brown scapular of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, if any of you are devotees or would like to be. It's just a sign that Our Lady is covering you with her mantle and that you're under her special protection. As time went on, the friars eventually founded a women's community, and the next few centuries, were just kind of like a simple time of Carmelites trying to live their lives well. But by the time you get to the 16th century, where Teresa of Avila, when Teresa of Avila was living, you might have heard that she was one of the more wealthy nuns in the first convent that she entered, and there was this great disparity of wealth even between the nuns in her convent. So that was one aspect where Teresa saw, we're not living the original poverty of our order, because we were started out by these hermits who lived in huts on this mountain. It would be lovely if we could get back to that original spirit of that original spirit of poverty. But even more so, Teresa saw that God was inviting her, and even more her sisters, to a life of deep prayer, of deep union with God. And she saw that the way to get to union with God was going to be going back to the silence and the solitude of the desert. So the first convent she entered had 200 nuns, but when she founded San Jose, the first discalced Carmelite convent, so when she reformed the order, the reformed Carmelites are called the discalced Carmelites, which means barefoot. So they didn't wear shoes, they wore sandals. So she founded the discalced Carmelites, and her first monastery, she said, no more than 13 nuns per monastery. Eventually she increased it to 21, but to this day in any Carmelite monastery, if more than 21 sisters join, they're going to found a new monastery, because they want to keep the numbers small so that they can keep a quiet and prayerful family atmosphere full of silence and solitude. And those are going to be the hallmarks of Carmel, no matter where you go. It's the silence and the solitude of the desert. They saw that, not all of us can go to the Holy Land and go to Carmel, to Mount Carmel itself in the Holy Land, and seek out that solitude. And so the answer, as they were moving into Europe and as cities became more populated, they said, we're just going to make Mount Carmel anywhere we are. So anywhere you are, if you want to go to Mount Carmel, all you have to do is draw away from the finite space and enter into infinite space. And this is going to be very important to understand this contemplative life of Mount Carmel, and especially the cloistered contemplative life of Teresa's nuns, is this idea of entering into infinite space. When a lot of people look at Carmelite nuns, there's this assumption that these are very introverted women who just like the idea of being quiet all the time and locked away. But any Carmelite would tell you that that kind of attitude is more self-focused and selfish, and those aren't the kind of women that God usually calls to Carmel. And the kind of people that God would be calling are those who really have a universal heart, who can take the whole world to their heart, and who would know that this world, as beautiful and as wonderful as it is, it's nothing next to God, right? And so you enter into the infinite space of Carmel, and it's like the whole universe is there in the chapel with you because you have God, right? And so the Carmelites see in contemplation, in silence, in solitude, in union with God, they see this great expansiveness. They see really there in the heart of Jesus, I can have everything. All things will be mine. John of the Cross has this great phrase that I was praying with yesterday, and that was on some of the banners around the city, where he says, the earth is mine and the heavens are mine. Mine are the angels. Mine is the mother of God. Everything is mine. All things are mine because God is mine and Christ himself is mine, right? So contemplation is part of the spirit of contemplation is being rooted in this expansive idea that if I really bury myself in the heart of Jesus, all things will be present to me. And so that's the idea of like entering into the silence and solitude of the desert. It's not because these friars and these nuns want to get away from everything, but because they love the world so much that the only possible way they can reach all the hearts of all of these people is by burying themselves in the infinite heart of Christ. And as the Carmelite order continued throughout the ages, there's just two more quick little saints you should know about. Many of you have told me you have a fondness for Saint Therese of Lisieux, who is the third doctor of the church from the Carmelite order. And the thing that she brought to the church is she saw the spirit of Saint Teresa, the spirit of Saint Elijah and John of the Cross. She wanted to imitate them, but she recognized that she was very ordinary, that she was a sinner, and that she did not have these extraordinary gifts of visions or prophecy that Teresa and John had. And so she said, well, how will I get to heaven? I have this desire in my heart to be a great saint like they were, but I'm very poor, I'm very small, and very weak. How will I do it? And Therese brought to the church the spirituality of merciful love and her way of spiritual childhood. You might have heard this referred to as the little way. And a lot of people think that the little way is just summed up by this phrase of doing small things with great love. But actually, the little way, a better way of looking at it is saying, I'm going to be a little child and I'm going to get into the arms of my Father, and in every possible way I'm going to let him lift me up into the heart of Christ. And that was Therese's way of being a saint. She just totally abandoned herself to God and trusted that all the virtues she needed and everything she needed in prayer, that Jesus would do those things for her if she really trusted him, and leaned on him and depended on him in the same way that small children have to depend on their parents to do everything for them. And so Therese is a great intercessor for me. I think she has a very universal spirituality, so if you're looking for a good saint friend, I think she's a very good one. But Carmelites will tell you their life is all about union with God, and so in all ways, Teresa and John, Saint Elijah, have a great path towards union with God, and Therese added to that by saying union with God is so achievable by every person in the church. It doesn't matter if you're a religious or a priest or a layperson. Union with God is for you, and all you have to do is abandon yourself to your Father and trust that He will get you there, and you will get there. And then finally, just as we're going to Alba de Tormes now, but tonight we'll be in Fatima. During the apparitions of Our Lady in Fatima, actually the last apparition on October 13th, Our Lady of Mount Carmel appeared during the miracle of the sun. And so she is deeply connected to Our Lady of Fatima, and obviously Carmel is all Mary's. And so Fatima, there was this beautiful call to do penance and to pray for sinners for the conversion of the world. Francisco and Jacinta were two of the children who saw Our Lady and who felt called to offer their lives at a very young age for sinners, and so they died very young. And their companion, Lucia, their cousin, also wanted to offer her life, but Our Lady said, "You're not going to go to heaven right away. You have a long life ahead of you of spreading devotion to my Immaculate Heart." And so Lucia lived to be, I believe, 97 years old, but her way of living out that offering was by becoming a Carmelite nun. And so she sought in that silence, in that solitude, union with God, union with the heart of Jesus, in a place in which she could offer her life for the world. And so just maybe one final thing to sum up, if you want to understand like what Carmelites are doing, what is their mission in the church. There's this beautiful quote by another Carmelite saint, Elizabeth of the Trinity, where she says, "A Carmelite is someone who has gazed on Jesus crucified. She has seen His love, she has seen the way that He offers Himself to the Father for souls and for the world, and just resting in that gaze, in His love, she desires to offer herself in the same way for the conversion of the world." And so that is kind of the spirituality of the Carmelite Order, and we're going to the burial place of Holy Mother Saint Teresa. So I don't know if that's attractive to you, you could ask her for a little bit of her spirit as well. So anyway, thank you.